What one's up? Oh, that one there. He ain't so tough looking to me. Don't you worry, Nancer. I'll fix him.
The Ogryns are the toughest and largest soldiers commonly used by the regiments of the Astra Militarum. Originating from cold, barren, high-gravity prison planets settled many millennia before the founding of the Imperium of Man, the Ogryns' distant ancestors were once normal humans during the Age of Technology. Thousands of standard years in the harsh terrains and brutal living conditions of their prison worlds after the start of the Age of Strife caused the fall of the first interstellar civilization of mankind, forced their ancestors' bodies to adapt to their hostile environment. The adaptation to the high-gravity environment as described above is the reason for the Ogryns' thick skin, powerfully muscular build, and resulting monstrous size as they stand between 2.5 to 3 meters tall. Though their adaptations led them to increase in physical size and strength, the Ogryns' intelligence declined to below average human levels. As the planetary conditions, barren, cold, little food, and long periods of starvation, that caused their mutation required only primitive survival instincts, part of their adaptation involved the loss of the ability for more complex intellectual thought, since philosophical matters were unnecessary in an environment marked by starvation and a constant fight for life. Ogryns are said to be even less intelligent than some orcs. However, the truth is that their intellects did not actually atrophy, but became much more focused on matters such as survival. The genes that enable psychic abilities are unknown among Ogryns as a result. Ogryns are claustrophobic, which means that they can only be loaded into armoured carrier vehicles with great difficulty to be transported to the battlefield, and can only ride in vehicles if a commanding officer is present. As many as half a squad may be mounted on a chimera. This slightly slows their deployment speed. An Ogryn's speech patterns in Low Gothic have been noted to be much the same as those observed in orcs. The Tithes Chamber Notaries planetary census is a subdivision of the Adeptus Administratum that oversees the classification and recognition of stable abhuman strains within the Imperium. Of these, 46 types are now listed as extinct, and no records have been received of a further 12 strains for over generation, suggesting that they too have died out or been assimilated back into the general population of humans. The status of the remaining 15 abhuman races is quite varied, and there is permanent disagreement about their specific classification amongst the adepts of the Tithes Chamber Notaries. The most noteworthy and contentious matter concerning the adepts is the Ogryns matrix of abhuman strains. This complex group is currently officially listed as 7 distinct types, but many in the chamber doubt that these are all separate subspecies of humanity, and yet another official revision of the classification is therefore pending in a few solar decades. When the Ogryns were rediscovered on their homeworlds by the Imperium during the Great Crusade, the Imperial Army saw their military potential and began recruiting the Ogryns as close combat soldiers. The recruitment process was relatively easy by Imperial standards, as Ogryns hardly needed any training. Most Ogryns are quite capable of bringing down almost any enemy, and their natural combat skills make them good assault troops. Remember, their brains are more developed to this sort of area than anything more abstract. The officers of the Imperial Army, and after the Horus Heresy reshaped the Imperium, those of the Astra Militarum, also found that the Ogryns were extremely loyal once introduced to the imperial state religion of faith in the Emperor of Mankind, the Imperial cult. They are known to believe and do anything their leaders say and ask, and see the orders they receive as having come down from the chain of command from the beloved God Emperor himself. On the other hand, Ogryns are known for their inability to understand complex commands and tactics. This simple-mindedness has also contributed to the big abhuman's reputation as being notoriously easy to corrupt to the service of chaos, particularly by the temptations of the blood god Khorne. Many Ogryns, for example, fought in the Vraxian traitor militia during the infamous siege of Vrax. Their skin is extremely thick, and Ogryns can ignore wounds that would cripple or kill a normal man. As they are brutal and direct, they favour knuckle dusters and knives for close combat. Ogryns in Imperial service are issued with special large auto shotguns known as ripper guns for ranged combat and clubbing in melee as well. The use of frag grenades is also popular among Ogryns. Although believed to possess extremely low intelligence, some Ogryns may have a slightly higher level of intellect than others. This boosts their chances to be known as candidates for the biochemical Ogryns neural enhancement procedure known as BONE, which raises their intelligence further. These relatively smart Ogryns are given the title Boneheads, as they are able to understand more complex orders and are placed in command of a squad of normal unaugmented Ogryns.
So I asked myself, what would Colonel Stracker do? Easy, I says. He'd probably yell at me for bloody standing about and not smashing things with me mates. So that's what I did. And they even gave me this here shiny medal when I was through.
Among the dim-witted Ogryn species, there exist certain rare individuals who, despite their primitive mindset, exhibit a rare glimmer of intelligence, problem-solving capabilities, memory, or natural drive. Such individuals stand out among their brethren, making them the ideal candidates for the aforementioned bone. These boneheads are often the brains of their units, putting them in a position of limited authority, and other Ogryns look at them for leadership both on and off the battlefield. To other Ogryns, the fact that a bonehead even holds his rank is often enough reason to obey, and most are content to trust as anyone who remembers as much as a bonehead probably knows best anyway. As such, the Boneheads unit often has few disciplinary problems and a clearly established hierarchy, assuming everyone remembers that they are supposed to be doing a certain thing at any given time. Boneheads are brutal but effective leaders, bellowing orders over the din of combat and punctuating their shouts with vicious blows from their oversized weapons. Where the average Ogrin is clumsy and ungainly, Boneheads are much more coordinated than their primitive brethren, and are able to wield weapons with surprising dexterity, though their inherent clumsiness can never be completely eradicated. Despite their abilities, they are not particularly well equipped compared to other Astra Militarum units, often fighting with the same weaponry as their unaugmented brethren. The main difference between a bonehead and his squad mates is the cerebral implants and modifications to their thick skulls. Despite their crude and sturdy appearance, these implants are actually quite sophisticated and capable of withstanding a fairly substantial amount of punishment, particularly useful when such device is borne by an Ogrin. In combat, the procedures enacted upon a bonehead's brain are put to the ultimate test as they confront numerous decisions and obstacles of command head-on. However, their determination and inhuman stubbornness often see them through such situations, while their unique physiology more than compensates for any lapses in discretion or judgment. As a result, an experienced bonehead is often capable of leading his fellow abhumans more or less where he is told with little practice. Despite their intelligence, boneheads naturally exhibit many qualities that define a good leader. They tend to be driven individuals, stubborn to a fault and unwilling to back down or admit defeat in even the most hopeless situations. Such dedication is often born of absolute faith in their superiors, whom boneheads trust implicitly and without reservation. They are also not afraid to lead from the front, providing an example to their fellow ogryn and encouraging them with simple intuitive commands, accompanied by bursts of fire from their ranged weapons. It is debatable whether this is learned behavior or simple necessity, however, as the stupidity of many ogryn recruits may render all but the simplest orders incomprehensible. However, despite their training and modifications, no amount of cerebral tinkering can completely eliminate the bonehead's base instincts, and even the most intelligent individuals suffer from bouts of savagery. Some boneheads are even equipped with cerebral implants to magnify or enhance these tendencies, turning them into engines of destruction once certain criteria are met or trigger phrases uttered in their vox links, activating them like a sleeper agent. Regardless, a bonehead's rages are truly terrifying to behold. An ogryn's primitive nature is the direct result of the harsh environment in which they develop. The cold, feral worlds of ice and death that the ogryn subspecies calls home, providing little incentive for mental development. As such, the ogryn embodies the most primitive aspects of humanity, though greatly enhanced and exaggerated due to their severe retrogression. Yet in spite of their dim-wittedness, they possess an underlying savagery and hardy physique that makes them incredibly useful on a battlefield of the 41st millennium. These ogres are of course used as shock troops for this reason, and armed with crude and simple weapons. Ogryn are well suited to these tactics, their underdeveloped brains rarely registering pain and injury as they smash into the enemy lines. Though equipped with powerful ripper guns, every ogryn is highly capable in close combat, their primitive brutality and massive physiques allowing them to crush their foes with a savagery that few adversaries can match. Yet despite this universal proficiency, there are individuals to whom the allure of smashing their enemies to a pulp and breaking their bones with blows from their massive fists is particularly appealing, more so than other ogryns. These are the ogryns who always go near the front of their unit, eagerly wading into combat with whatever weapon happens to be at hand. Some simply enjoy crushing enemy skulls to powder or tearing off limbs with their bare hands, while others may rely on their volatile temperament, flying off into a killing rage at the mere mention of their hated enemy. Some are so stupid that they cannot truly comprehend the nature of their situation, delighting in what they consider an enjoyable game as they revel in the shouts of encouragement and support from their comrades. However, many simply resort to close combat because they can, their primitive brains falling back on their natural instincts in the heat of battle. These sorts of ogryns are always found at the forefront of battle, eagerly overwhelming their opponents with devastating blows from their massive fists and oversized weapons. Many tend to have little understanding of ranged warfare, either having foregone much of the training required to further their combat abilities, or simply being too dense to comprehend such tactics. This makes them generally savage, even by ogryn standards, while their size and feral aspect serves only to magnify their combat effectiveness. As with all ogryns, the line between placid stupidity and mindless rage is a fine one, and is easily crossed in the rush of combat. The death of a companion, the harsh words of a commander, wounds inflicted by an enemy, Any of these may be enough to drive such an Ogryns into paroxysms of rage at the mere sight of a foe. However, the rages of such a savage individual are a thing to behold as their primitive minds aggressively lash out at the source of their ire. This propensity towards violence often serves to make their legendarily short tempers even shorter, while an Ogryns Bulwark at the height of his anger is a rampaging whirlwind of destruction that dashes his foes to pieces with the sheer force of his blows. In combat, a Bulwark is the embodiment of primitive savagery and rage, fighting just without thought of self-restraint or preservation. They instinctively attack every enemy within range, swinging their weapons with such bone-crunching force that armor buckles and bodies shatter in their wake. So intent are they on crushing their foes, they are immune to pain, injury, and fear, blindly charging through whatever obstacle stands between them and their enemy. The sight of a Bulwark on the battlefield often provides tremendous encouragement and inspiration to his comrades as he smashes through all those that stand before him. Some Astra Militarum regiments view their Ogryns as sorts of champion, sending them forward whenever a particularly vicious adversary appears, and looking to them when all seems lost and the unit is on the verge of being overwhelmed. Time and time again, as the Bulwark's mighty blows split his adversaries apart and his massive physique ignores all but the most grievous of wounds, his comrades take strength from this steadfast example and push on into the bloody conflict. At other times, the Bulwark may serve as the rock upon which the unit is grounded, an unbreakable foundation for his comrades to cling on to, and an endearing example of faith and devotion.
Now you see this dent here? That was made by an orc skull, by the Emperor. I'd swear some of them are as thick as a chimera's treadguard, but that didn't stop Crund from splitting his head open like an Ugrok's egg. No, sir. And you see that warp in there by the shell extractor? Apparently, that's what happens when you fire 5,000 continuous rounds without a recharge. They need to teach these Ogryns how to work the bloody guns, mate.
An Ogryns' ranged weapon proficiency and indeed comprehension may vary greatly from individual to individual, often coming down to the Ogryns' individual dexterity and whatever or not he is able to remember of how to operate the firearm when it comes to a combat situation. Regardless, Ogryns are markedly uncoordinated as a rule, and any attempts at accuracy often produce results that are mixed at best. Even the most skilled Ogryns marksman rarely approaches the exacting degree of precision expected of the average Imperial Guardsman. However, there are many Ogryns who derive substantial enjoyment from the mere act of firing their weapon, regardless of accuracy, instead reveling in the raw destructive power in their hands as they thoughtlessly expend countless rounds of ammunition downrange. Such Ogryns are usually particularly colossal creatures whose bulging muscles and gigantic stature allow them to manipulate their oversized weapons as effortlessly as a normal man might wield a lasgun, while relying on their immense bulk to compensate for any recoil. Many are even large enough to fire their weapons on the move, acting like a sort of mobile fire support platform for their fellow soldiers, while eagerly charging into the fray. Once they begin firing, gun luggers rarely stop until they either run out of either ammunition or opponents. Although the weapons they wield in combat may vary, a childlike glee these individuals exhibit for their battlefield roles is unmistakable. They are often sweeping their great weapons back and forth in wide arcs during battle, grinning stupidly as they pulverize their targets with concentrated streams of high-caliber fire. Most tend to lag slightly behind, the other members of their unit stopping whenever a shot presents itself, and only continuing to advance at the bidding of a superior officer or when they no longer have anything at which to shoot. They are usually eager to come into grips with their foes, habitually disregarding enemy fire or any considerations of personal safety in order to discharge their weapons at their targets. In addition, the expenditure of all their ammunition or the colossal weapon jam is a frequent cause of wildly destructive tantrum among these trigger-happy brutes, and many choose to vent their savage rage by charging headlong into the enemy's ranks and bashing their adversaries to bits with the offending weapon. Other members of these units often rely on the relentless fire of a gun lugger, advancing forward while their large comrade empties round after round at every enemy in sight. Gun luggers are also particularly useful among squads of either other Ogryns or similarly equipped assault units, proving crucial fire support until their more hands-on companions can close the distance with their foe. Even those armed with ripper guns tend to wield them to greater effect than other Ogryns, and often the newest and most reliable models within an Ogryns squad are reserved for the use of a gun lugger. Due to their constant exposure to enemy fire, some gun luggers hold reputations for outstanding bravery and stalwart determination among the units they fight beside, serving as mobile rallying points and potent examples of bravery to any faltering allies. They are generally battered in appearance, their thick hide scarred and pitted from countless impacts that would have severely incapacitated an average soldier. Many gun luggers carry other items to add to their destructive capabilities, in addition to their firearms, including grenades, anti-tank bombs, incendiary devices, and other simple explosives which they may hurl at enemy positions. These weapons are often quite effective in the hands of a gun lugger, assuming that he knows how to properly arm the device or remembers to use it in the frenzy of battle. Some compensate for such errors by hurling multiple charges at once, or expending their bandoliers as rapidly as possible, laughing with delight as huge swathes of the battlefield erupt in fire and death. Though rarely landing where the Ogryns intends, the volatile payloads of such weapons frequently remedy any concerns regarding the Ogryns' accuracy. Ogryns make excellent bodyguards, for they are loyal, determined, and extremely hard to kill. In this role they have but one duty: to protect the Astra Militarum officer for whom they are assigned as oath-bound bodyguards. Whether they achieve this by throwing themselves in the line of fire, or by slaughtering all enemies who come near their charge, they are invaluable retainers in the swirl of combat. Among the officer cadres of Astra Militarum regimental commands, it is considered a great honor to have an oath-bound Ogryn bodyguard. Normally Ogryns are such a valuable asset that they are formed into squads and used as shock troops or blocking detachments, but sometimes a high-ranking officer manages to requisition one for his own personal retinue. In the same way that officers sometimes have advisors from other arms of an Imperial crusade or other Imperial forces, an Ogryn can end up shadowing a captain, colonel, or general as they take a journey to the front to inspect the war. Imperial officers also take great pleasure in the intimidation factor that an Ogryn brings to any tactical briefing or even social engagement, the towering abhumans making everyone in the room painfully aware of their own insignificance and mortality. Rarer still are the instances where an Ogryn will form a bond of fellowship with a non-ranking officer or even regular guardsman. Simple minds of these hulking abhumans can, for reasons unknown, become fixated on a particular human in an autistic way, especially if that human shows them kindness or just happens to be in the right place at the right time with the right train set. Once an Ogryn connects with an Imperial soldier in his way, The bond becomes almost unbreakable. Reports from various war zones confirm that this has happened on several occasions, with charismatic and outrageous and courageous junior officers acquiring for themselves the undying loyalty of one of these titanic abhuman shock troopers. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there are species, if that is the right word, of chaos ogryns that have strayed from the Emperor's light. They often fall to the worship of the ruinous powers, as they are childlike and easy to manipulate. The servants of chaos also forcibly conscript ogryns into their ranks in a sort of slave labour situation. Known as ogryn brutes, the servants of the dark gods will utilize crude surgical procedures, forbidden combat drugs, and sorcerous rituals in order to control the beasts and set them upon their enemies. Through the use of further modification and forbidden methods, Chaos Renegades have also created two distinct variations of Ogryn brutes, the Ogryn berserkers and the plague ogryns. Now, these Ogryn berserkers are surgically altered heavily, using prescribed neurological and biochemical processes. This crude adaptation starts by lobotomizing the ogryn, turning it into an imbecilic, docile creature, unable to even feed itself, and becoming utterly enslaved to its masters, until the chemical injectors installed directly into its upper back are activated. The injectors deliver a cocktail of potent, highly dangerous drugs, including the banned combat drug called Slort, to the ogryn's bloodstream and muscles. Slort, once favoured by the notorious Flesh Tearers Space Marine chapter and the World Eaters Traitor Legion, stimulates the subject's adrenaline glands and the neural pathways to the areas of the brain that govern aggression. With these driven into overdrive, the user becomes a raging psychopath, driven by bloodlust that cannot be slated. Other drugs are also injected, including various phencyclidines that give the user massively increased strength and an almost superhuman ability to block pain, with side effects such as induced hallucinations and a desire for self-mutilation. Strong beta-adrenoreceptor blocking drugs augment this, allowing the ogryn to fight on with terrible wounds that would usually kill it outright. The downside of this drug-fueled rampage is the body system is not likely to be able to cope with the drugs for long, and vital internal organs will quickly start to fail. Ogryn berserkers are used as expendable troops and were deployed during the siege of Vrax by the Vraxian traitor militia, and were not supposed to survive their first encounter with the enemy. They were a one-use weapon, hurled into the enemy in furious counterattacks with the single aim of inflicting as much damage as possible before collapsing or being slain. Plague ogryns are hideously distorted creatures, hulking masses of bloated, diseased flesh and twisted mutations. The effects of Nurgle's gifts on the already massively strong and hardy ogryn frame are particularly foul, and they prove ideal breeding grounds for a nightmarish plague of all kinds and varieties. In battle, these creatures can prove almost impossible to kill, and their merest touch brings a horrific death. The first plague ogryns are believed to have been created by the mysterious heretic Astartes warband known as the Tainted on Vrax Prime during the infamous Siege of Vrax. A faction devoted to Nurgle in its aspect as a mortifier of flesh, they are said to have worked the darkest of their sorcerous acts on the already distorted and chem-augmented ogryn slave stock being used by the rebel forces on Vrax Prime. Since that war, Ordo Malleus servants believe the secrets of creating plague ogryns have been refined further by the Tainted deep within the Eye of Terror, and they are now trading these vile beasts among the servants of the Lord of Decay in return for fresh subjects on which to practice their twisted craft. Ogryn Charonites were specialist detachments of the Imperial Army during the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy era that were assigned to the elite Solar Auxilia cohorts when brute strength was required. As their name indicated, Charonite squads were only constituted of the physically powerful abhumans known as ogryns. Unlike the more common ogryn bulwark or gun ripper squads, the Charonite squads were a far more specialized detachment that could, in some regards, be considered as the predecessors of present-day Militarum Bullgryns, the melee ogres that carry shields and grenade launchers, although they also shared a lot in common with the infamous Chaos Ogryn berserkers, which are thought to be a bastardized version of the original Charonite template.
Please, like and subscribe, follow. Ooh.